There's races all over the place, different ethnicities, from Jamaicans to Haitians to like Trinidad, Tobago, like I think Creole. You also have Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Jewish people, blacks. Blacks to me were different compared to blacks in the South. There was African Americans. To me, those are guys who are from Chad, from South Africa, who are actually from Africa. So that was a different dynamic too. But I really didn't experience racism until I moved to North Carolina, and I started talking to people, and they can tell I was not from here. You can listen to my accent, and you can hear that's not normally what people think Hispanic people sound like. But at the same time, people even know who are very ignorant of where Cuba was. People are like, yeah. So I was like, yeah, I'm Cuban. They're like, oh, what part of Mexico is that from? I'm like, it's not. It is an island to the south of Florida. And there was a constant thing that I had to deal with. And also, if you see the video, if we ever post a video or you see anything on my social media, I'm a big dude. I'm not short. I'm 6'3". My grandmother's 5 foot. And like, there's like, when we have family portraits, I sit down so everyone can be my height. And so like, I'm not your typical Hispanic person. But when I moved up here, people already declassed me because of my ethnicity. Now, I understand I would introduce myself as Kyle just so that I can, actually not they, but more me can feel accepted. But the one thing that hurt the most and was the biggest racism to me was when I finally admit to them or say or confess that I'm Cuban, there's always a face change of, oh, you're Hispanic. And that was the most painful thing to endure, because you can tell what they viewed me before was no longer what they're going to view me now. Now I'm classified as a Mexican and nothing more, nothing less. And that was the hardest part of racism, where people, spick. If you don't know what that means, that's basically the N-word to Hispanic people. Why don't you get back on your raft and go back to Cuba? In high school. And I'm like, dude, getting threats from the KKK? Like, that was real in the South. I thought that was all movie fake stuff. Yeah. But when I moved up here, you just saw that the racism is very real. And the hard part too was, as you mentioned in the introduction, the actual racism struggle for me was like, in discussions of racism in the South or in the United States, I was invisible because it wasn't Latinos or Hispanics. It wasn't browns. It was just blacks and whites. So that was a whole different type of racism I had to deal with, that even though I'm a different color shade in God's beautiful design, I'm still not considered worthy enough to be part of the conversation of racism.
No, and just listening to what you were saying, it's crazy how racism seemed to be a very regional thing, that even though you were in Florida, it was more like a melting pot. Where exactly in Florida?
So it's Miami.
Miami's like...
So I would say, if people know Florida enough, West Palm Beach north is Florida. Yeah. West Palm Beach south is a whole different country. Just because if you go to Gainesville where the Gators play, you won't find people who speak Spanish there fluently at times. Tampa you will, Miami you won't.
And just thinking about when we're talking about just regionally. So Roshan, you were born in Saudi Arabia, or born in India, grew up in Saudi Arabia. Yep. You never seen a Spanish person. Or have you?
Not until moving here, I hadn't.
That is crazy.
To the U.S. Yeah.
What about like white people?
Yeah. So, do you want me to go ahead and share kind of
my
background and my story? Yeah. So,
trying to make it a smooth transition, but you
there you go. Yeah. This is where I start my story.
Press play. Should I go?
I'm Roshan. I'm natively from India. Grew up or was born in South India, and lived my early childhood in India till about the age of 10. I did my elementary schooling in India, and then moved to Saudi Arabia because my parents had jobs there, and was there 6th to 10th grade. Okay. But where I lived in Saudi Arabia was kind of a big city, something equivalent to an Atlanta or Chicago or something. So by virtue of being a big city, even though it was Saudi Arabia of all places, it attracted a lot of international workers. So you would find a good population of people that were not the locals, not the Saudi Arabian folks. And so because of that, while there was a good amount of Indian people, and I stayed mostly among them. I went to an Indian education school, even in Saudi. I was exposed to many international groups of people, so we would see a lot of European or American folks.
So let me ask a question real quick. When you said I went to an Indian school at Saudi Arabia, were there schools dedicated for just particular races only?
Not
ethnicities, I'm
racist,
sorry.
but more so international students.
Okay.
So the idea is that people who were foreign workers from India could reliably have their children, going to a school that would provide them with the same education they would back home. So it's more so the curriculum. So the same type of testing, same textbooks, same stuff was the stuff my Indian friends from back home were learning. So it was more of a standardized, because the reputation was that the local schools were built kind of for citizens of Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. And if you know anything about Saudi Arabia, it is a state that is organized around Islam.
Correct.
And therefore all of their structures are built around that, including their education system.
Okay.
So for me, that was the best decision for my parents to make, to mimic the most close experience that it would be for me to go to school in my own home.
And how many years were you there in Saudi Arabia in school?
6th to 10th grade, so 5 years.
Oh, wow.
There. However, my parents have been working in Saudi Arabia since 1990 or so.
Okay.
It's just that's when we moved to a big city in Saudi Arabia where there was a good school that they were happy to bring me back to Saudi Arabia for. But anyway, so yeah, I lived outside the U.S. till I was 16. And then in 2006, I moved to, of all places, Louisville, Kentucky. Not my decision. That was my parents' decision to make, to find the best employment opportunities that my mom could. And I don't blame her. They're happily living there. My parents happily live there to this day. And, but yeah, so my journey in the United States and journey as an ethnic minority and a cultural minority started, in the summer of 06. So it's been about 12 and a half years at this point. And my wife and I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina about a year and a half ago. So a good 11 years was spent in Louisville, Kentucky. And that was a big change. People ask me when I moved here, and when I shared that I'm an first generation immigrant, that, hey, was the culture shock severe? And for me, the interesting thing is living in a big city and global kind of city in Saudi Arabia, I already was exposed to a lot of the big pop culture stuff. So it wasn't that was a shock. I even spoke English fluently growing up. It was a Queen's English, but nonetheless, the right English.
Well, excuse me, Governor.
Here.
Well, what was that?
Cheerio, mate.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I don't know why Australian came in there, but yeah. But really, the shock was in the fact that you moved to Kentucky, and it's in a group of, I'm living in a group that is majority white folks, and majority people that are not used to meeting almost any kind of minority, let alone, an Indian immigrant. So that was rough. Yeah. I feel
your pain, because when I moved up here, the natural thing I always got from people is like, oh, you're the first other Hispanic person I met.
Yep.
I'm like, it's Raleigh. I think you'll meet more, but no, there's parts that you don't. Or 2, you're the first Cuban. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I should not be your first example of what a Cuban person is.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I understand that, man. Yeah. So for me, that was a lot of the case. It's fascinating because you kind of understand the paradigm or the view that people are coming from, in that when I came in, and it was right before junior year of high school. So my first couple of years being in high school, that was rough, coming in right in the middle of high school when everyone already has their network set up. But I would get questions like, oh, are you an international student? Or, are you spending one semester here or multiple semesters? Completely not kind of trying to come across as bigoted, just purely did not have the mindset of, oh, there could be an immigrant among us. You could be an actual immigrant coming here not to just get an education and go back, or not to just do a temporary gig, but are here to stay and are here as part of our culture. So that has been kind of emblematic of my experience largely living in Kentucky, in that it's a lot of trying to find my way in, kind of familiar with the tone of acceptance or acceptance that you shared. But it's kind of trying to earn my way into the community with the majority culture. And it's been very tough. It's been very
I
tough.
wanted to stop you right there because it's unique because you came from a place where you were the majority culture back in India, and so I'm assuming there was not that much racism prevalent there. I do remember you telling me there was issues of colorism.
Yeah.
So is that possibly like the form of racism that you experienced?
What is colorism?
Sure, yeah. So what you can find within India, or just among Indian people, even all over the world, is colorism is very prominent. Colorism is where there might not be racial differences between me and my fellow Indian citizens or Indian people, but we come in various shades of brown, going from light and passing as white to dark, very dark. That could potentially pass as black. And so what you also saw then is a hierarchy system based on how fair you were. So the more fair you were, the more beautiful you were perceived to be. And that was something that was ingrained, but also businesses cater to that in the way they fashion makeup and stuff like that.
It's like some people in the African American culture, and you can speak to this, Brand, if you want, of the brown paper bag concept.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that till you mentioned it.
Yeah. Do you know about that?
You was telling me, but go ahead.
So I learned this from speaking to girls and talking to the guys, African American culture, that you get a classic proper brown paper bag that you took to school. For some people, the more accepted you are is the closer your skin tone is to the brown paper bag. You can see subculturally that the darker you are, somewhat you're not accepted. And the whiter you are, even not accepted. So I thought it was a really interesting concept to see that.
But isn't that shown in... Because the crazy thing you told us about, and you kind of said it in passing, like you said, there's a difference between Latinos, Hispanic, and then Bonic. I don't want to even mess it up. Boricuas?
Boricua, that means Puerto Rico. That's Puerto Rico. Mulatto.
Okay. Mulatto, but the mulatto has a different...
So it's a café con leche, basically, some people will say, where it's a mix of race of white and black. So you have that kind of a mulatto taste. But I'm sorry, what was your question? I blanked.
Colorism is... You were talking about it from a black perspective, and other black people would be like, "Why is the Hispanic person talking about colorism from a black?" But
he's Brown's black splaining.
Yeah, it's exactly black splaining.
Wow,
yeah, good one.
Slap hands.